Thank you very much, Ignite. I'm so happy to finally be here. I have to say, year after year, I keep hearing about this Ignite conference. My Catholic friends come back from this every year saying how transformative, how amazing it was. And every year I'm listening to their lovely stories and I'm just feeling the same thing every single year. Massive FOMO. So now it's my turn to be here. It's my pleasure and my privilege to be sharing in this extraordinary experience with you. Now, I just have a quick personal disclaimer about myself. See, you just saw that one particular TikTok video that just hit 1 million views. And that's... Thank you. It's become a bit of a problem for me because when I go to conferences now, often people have seen all of this ridiculous content I post and they just assume that I'm this kind of outgoing, confident, zany priest ready to get up and preach at a moment's notice. Well, what they don't know is that every single TikTok I've posted is about 300 takes because I'm actually very nervous and awkward in person. So I'm actually very scared right now. So if you wouldn't mind, please just whisper a prayer to the Holy Spirit under your breath, praying that I make it through this talk without just fainting on stage. But if I do happen to faint on the stage, if someone could please just film that and send it to me, because that would make some really viral content. I would love that. So we've heard the theme for this year's conference. We've been hearing this word again and again, wonder. Well, when I sat down to think about this word, to pray about this word, the first thing that came to my mind was this idea of awe or awesomeness. The idea of witnessing something or experiencing something so amazing we can't even find the words to express it. All we can do is look and wonder. Take, for example, right now, just call to mind the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in nature. Whether it's a mountain range, whether it's a powerful waterfall. For me, it's a childhood memory of sitting on the beach with my family, the sand between my toes, colourful sky as the sun set, looking out over the ocean, warm breeze on my skin, the smell of hot chips in the air. It was such a beautiful moment. All I could do was sit back and wonder. For some of you, that sense of wonder might come from music. You might be walking along, listening to a Spotify playlist, and then that song comes on. That song that slaps so hard it makes the hair on your arms stand up on end. The song that you just have to lay back and vibe with. All you can do is wonder. And then there is the most profound type that any human can ever experience. I'm talking about the wonder of experiencing the life-changing love of Jesus. See, I had that experience for the first time, not the last, but the first time in my life, when I was 15 years old. I'm going to tell you that story a little bit later, maybe towards the end of the talk. Because there's another meaning to this idea, wonder, that came to mind when I was praying about it. And that is to question, to wonder. But to wonder isn't just asking the small little questions like what's for dinner or what's on the radio or TV. To really wonder is to ask the big questions. I'm talking about those questions that are deep down in every human heart. Those questions that if we just took the AirPods out for a moment, if we just stopped scrolling Insta Reels and TikTok, these are the kind of questions that come bubbling to the surface in every human soul, if we just give them the time. These are questions that are so massive, they almost feel like anxiety at first, and we want to push them down. The kind of questions we actually need a bit of courage to ask. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the deepest wonderings, the deepest desires of the human heart. I wonder, what is the purpose and the meaning of my life? I wonder, where can I find true and lasting happiness? And I wonder, how can I experience authentic, life-giving love? These questions of purpose, happiness, and love, these are the deepest questions, the deepest longings of every human heart. And I know that for a fact, because I'm sure I could choose any of you out in the crowd right now, and I know that you would climb up any mountain, you would sail across any ocean, you would spend any amount of money to find the answer to a single one of those questions. What is your ultimate purpose in life? Where can you find true and lasting happiness? Or how can you experience life-giving love that satisfies your soul? Purpose, happiness, love. These are the deepest longings, or some of the deepest longings of the human heart. So I want you to repeat them with me because I'm going to quiz you on it later. Purpose, happiness, love. One more time. Purpose, happiness, love. And I think it is so natural for all of us when we're given the opportunity to sit in silence to start wondering about these things. In fact, I believe that God put those questions on your heart. And he put them there because when we have the opportunity to pray, when we have the opportunity to sit in silence and truly wonder, those desires inevitably lead us like a compass on a ship to the one answer that truly satisfies our purpose, our happiness and love. And I'm talking about the experience, the relationship that we can have with Jesus. Jesus is the goal of our soul. I promise you, Jesus is the answer to the deepest longings of your heart. All you have to do is let him in. But there's a catch. I don't know why, there's always just seems to be a catch. In this case, it's not so much a catch as it caught in my throat. It's not so much a catch as it is a complication. But complications, they're not the worst thing in the world, because as we know from English class, every good story that has ever been told has a complication. What am I talking about? Well, imagine one of my favorite movies, Avengers Endgame, without the character Thanos. Imagine that movie without Thanos. That movie would suck. It would literally be a bunch of superpowered human beings sitting around a dinner table wondering about the weather. We're not lining up to see that movie without the complication. Well, if you're not into superheroes like me, maybe you're into magic. Maybe you prefer Harry Potter. Imagine, a few fans here, imagine Harry Potter without Voldemort. It would literally be a series of movies about angsty teenagers going to magic school. It's not that compelling. But that's fiction. What about reality? What about in the reality of our life? Who is our Thanos? What is our Voldemort? What is that one complication that stands between us and fulfilling those deepest desires of our heart through relationship with Jesus Christ? What is that complication that stops us fulfilling those desires? The answer is sin. And I know we don't like to talk about it. I know it's one of those kind of confronting topics. But the complication in our life, our Thanos, our Voldemort, the thing that stops us from fulfilling our deepest desires is sin. And I'm talking about evil that exists in the world, the flesh, and the devil. When I say the world, I'm talking about the evil that exists outside of ourselves. I'm talking about things like Russia invading Ukraine. I'm talking about things like human trafficking. I'm talking about those things that only appear on the darkest places of the internet. When I talk about the flesh, I'm talking about the sin that exists in us. That selfishness that exists within us. That desire to put our wants and our desires above the wants, the desires, and the needs of others. And when I talk about the devil, I'm talking about that lying voice that can sometimes whisper in all of our ears and say, you are not enough, or you are not worthy of God's love. See, complication, sin is our complication because it affects all of us. It hurts all of us. We've all felt its darkness. And the funny thing about sin is all of us, we keep falling into its traps and its tricks again and again and again. Why do we do it? It's because we're broken. Or as we heard Father Rob say today, it's because we're messed up. I'm messed up, you're messed up. I can't do a Maltese accent, but we're all messed up. See, sin is our complication, whether we recognize it or not, because we've all been hurt by it. We're messed up. There's a really easy way to prove it. Put your hand up now if you've ever been hurt by someone. If they've lied to you, if they've betrayed you, if they've insulted you. All of us have been hurt by sin. So that's sin outside of us hurting us. Here's a harder question. Put your hand up now if you've ever been responsible for hurting someone else by lying to them, insulting them, betraying them. Everyone. See, sin doesn't just exist out there. It's also worked its way into our own lives and into our own hearts. But look, here's the good news. This is literally the good news of the gospel that we're always talking about. If we learn to recognize the darkness of this sin, if we learn to understand the tricks that sin can play on our mind and on our heart, if we learn to shine a light on this darkness, then just like when Tony Stark stole the Infinity Stones out of Thanos' glove and put them in his own, when we shine a light on sin, then we too inherit the power to defeat sin, to fight back, to repent from it, to be healed from it. But the power that we receive in Jesus is not just about repenting from sin, it's about embracing a fullness of life that you cannot even imagine. A life where you find the answers to those deep desires of purpose, of happiness, and of love. So in order for me to give you that power, well, I can't do anything, only God can. In order for you to receive that power to overcome sin, I need to tell you how sin works. So that with the help of Jesus, with the help of God's grace, which is more powerful than all of the Infinity Stones, you can begin to fight back against this darkness that exists in the world, in ourselves, and in the devil. See, I said before, there's these three longings of every human heart. Now it's quiz time. What are they? What's number one? What's number two? What's number three? Purpose, happiness, love. These are the three longings of every human heart. And I said before, we will literally do anything to satisfy those desires. Cross any sea, ocean, climb any mountain. But here's the thing, if I know that about you, if I know that you've got these desires and you know that about me, and we know that we'll do absolutely anything to fulfill them, guess who else knows? Everyone. And because the world has been messed up by sin, people can use that knowledge of your deepest desires to manipulate you, to take from you your time, your attention, and even your money. See, every marketing department in the world knows this, especially in social media, in entertainment, the tobacco and vaping industry, the alcohol industry, the fashion industry, even the darker ones like human trafficking, drugs, and pornography industries. They know this about us. See, this is how Thanos gets control in the real world. Sin creeps into our life by weaving its way into the culture around us, manipulating our desires, whether we know it or not, making itself appear wonderful, as something attractive, as something normal, as something pleasurable, as something cool, as something fun. See, all it takes is for one company or one popular person to convince the culture that their product or their values are going to satisfy what our heart is yearning for at the deepest level. And once they convince us of that, if they can convince us that they can give us purpose, happiness, or love, then they've got us hook, line, and sinker, because that's all our heart wants. Let me just give you 3 examples. The 3 fastest growing negative or destructive addictions among young people today are social media, vaping, and pornography. See, what they do is they can all start off by promising something very attractive, but if we're not careful, they can cause an awful lot of pain. Take, for example, social media. Apps like Facebook, or now what I'm using, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. See, these are wonderful things because what they promise us is purpose, a sense of connection, a sense of connection to our friends, our family, our community, our culture, even celebrities. And when they're used in moderation, they're wonderful. See, I love them. I use them for my work, as you've just seen. But I also know that the algorithm isn't designed for moderation. I also know that what starts off as promising us purpose and connection and meaning can quickly become hours and hours and hours of meaningless scrolling. Seeking the newest, the dankest content. We want more, but it never fills us up. You know what I'm talking about. Hours being invested into an app where you could have been with family, friends in reality. Similar to that is vaping. It promises a sense of happiness. And I'm not just talking about the chemical effects of nicotine. I'm talking here about why vaping starts in the first place. The desire to look cool, the desire to be in the in crowd, the desire to be popular. But as we all know from the recent studies, what starts off as the promise of a kind of happiness can very quickly become a painful cycle of dependence that is very difficult, but with the help of God, not impossible to break. And finally, there's pornography.
Pornography is a scourge on our society because it comes and it's convinced the world that it's some kind of normal thing, and it's presenting the world with an image of human love. But let me tell you, all that pornography is giving is objectification, reducing human beings down to nothing more than their bodies, completely ignoring the value of their soul and their desire to be cherished and truly loved.
See, it promises love, which our heart desires, but all it delivers is lust. And if that takes control in our heart, then it can destroy not one, but all of our relationships. See, I realize I'm talking about really heavy things right now, but this is precisely how sin tricks the world. It presents itself as something attractive in the moment, something fulfilling in the moment. But when it's got us ensnared, it throws us to the side.
And just leaves us feeling like we're isolated, empty, and in the dark. But of course the story doesn't end there. I'm not going to leave you down in the dark, because that is not where the story ends. Because if every good story has a complication, it also has a resolution. And nobody knew that resolution. Nobody felt that resolution quite like my boy, the guy who I consider to be the GOAT of the New Testament, apart from Jesus, of course. I'm talking about St. Paul the Apostle. Yeah. Let's give it up for St. Paul. I love St. Paul. I love St. Paul. You love St. Paul by the look of it. I love St. Paul because he is a relatable saint.
He's a saint who was a little bit messed up like you and like me. He's a saint who, even after he met Jesus, he kept struggling with sin, but he never gave up. He never stopped pursuing Jesus, and he never stopped spreading the love of Jesus to the whole world. Now, most of you probably know this story about St. Paul, which means you know that he didn't start off as Paul, certainly not Saint Paul. He started off as Saul, and Saul means king in Greek.
And Saul was living a little bit like a king. See, he had absolutely everything that the world tells us we think we want. He had money, he had power, he had prestige, he had influence, he had super intellect. Our boy was basically like the top G Andrew Tate of first century Palestine. And that is not a good thing, in case you're wondering. See, because just like Andrew Tate, even though it looked like he had all of this stuff going for him from the outside, Saul was getting led deeper and deeper into moral darkness.
It got to the point that Saul started to rejoice. He not only felt justified, but he felt good about doing terrible things, like persecuting and killing Christians. And that's what happens if sin completely takes control of someone's life. But the story doesn't end there. See, one day Saul was cruising along the road to Damascus on his way to persecute and maybe kill some more Christians. And then he had this explosive moment. All of a sudden, he had this vision of Jesus. And as Gen Z loves to say, our boy was shook. He was so shook that he was smashed to the ground. And while he's on the ground, Jesus reaches out to him and says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? In this moment, Saul had this experience of Jesus that changed everything. He had this experience of Jesus' love that began to turn his whole world around. Everything began to change. And I'm not just talking about his name. The entire value structure of Saul's world began to turn upside down. How do we know this? Because Saul himself, or St. Paul, tells us, looking back on his old life, back when he was the Andrew Tate character, he says, everything that I considered gains, I now consider a loss for the sake of Jesus. And yes, I'm not talking about fully sick gains in the gym. Saul, what Paul was talking about was all the things that he thought his heart wanted, that money, the power, the success, the pleasure, the influence, all of that, all the things he thought he wanted, he considered now to be rubbish when he compared those to the life-changing love of Jesus. I said before, if someone can sell you on that promise that they can give you purpose, happiness, or love, then they can control you. And St. Paul knew this because it had happened to him, but he didn't want it to happen to us. And so he dropped some of the hardest advice, some of the hardest content I think the world had ever seen back then. He didn't have TikTok or Insta Reels, so he just had to settle for writing a letter to the Colossians. And this is what he said. He said, you must live your whole life in Jesus Christ and be built on him. What does he mean? He means that Jesus must be our foundation. Because if we place anything above him, you know, money, power, success, popularity, whatever. If we place anything above Jesus, the whole tower begins to fall down. He goes on to explain this line. He says to us, make sure that nobody traps you. Make sure that they don't take away your freedom by some second-hand, empty, rational philosophy based on principles of this world instead of Christ. What he's saying is that if you put as your top priority money, power, pleasure, whatever it is, and you place it above Jesus, there's no amount of that thing that the human heart can have and be satisfied. There is no amount of money that we can earn. There's no amount of pleasure that we can experience where the human heart says, yep, I'm finished, that's enough. Because that's not how we operate. God hasn't made us that way. Our heart, our soul is made for one thing, and that's Jesus. And St. Paul says that himself. He says, in Jesus lives the fullness of divinity, and in him you too will find your fulfillment. Only in Jesus will you find purpose, happiness, and love. Now I realize I could talk about this all day. It's one thing for me to talk about Jesus. It's another thing entirely for you to experience in your own life his life-changing love. There's a massive difference between theory and experience. We all know this. For example, do we have any Taylor Swift fans here? I thought so. Okay. Well, just imagine this for a moment. Imagine your friend, your bestie, came up to you and said, listen, for your birthday, you are going to meet Taylor Swift. Wow. Imagine, you'd be so pumped. But just imagine this. You wait, your birthday rolls around, you get given the card, you're opening it, you open the card, and what are you expecting? You're expecting backstage passes to her Eras tour in February of 2024. Yeah. But what you get is a newspaper article. And all it does is describe Taylor Swift and describe her concert. That's the gift. You would be livid because we all know that there is a world of difference between simply knowing about Taylor Swift and actually experiencing that concert for yourself. Well, the same logic applies to Jesus. There is a world of difference between simply knowing about Jesus from friends, family, or religion class and actually experiencing that life-changing love for yourself. See, this happened to me for the first time. I had this experience of Jesus for the first time when I was 15 years old. And it happened at a time in my life when I had very low self-esteem. See, I went to a very sporty school that was right near the beach. And so if you wanted to be popular in my school, you needed to have three things. Number one, you needed to be tanned, or at least capable of getting a tan. And you had to be fit or well built. You had to be tanned for the beach, you had to be fit for footy. Number two, you had to be confident enough to be a hit with the ladies. You know what I'm about to say? You had to have Riz. Now, look, why? Why was it so important in my school? It's because we were an all-boys school next to an all-girls school. There was a limited time frame of on the bus in the morning and the afternoon. So the competition was fierce. You had to have Riz. And number 3, and the most important in my school, was you had to be successful in sport. So just imagine how I went when I rocked up in year 7 as the nervous, pasty white, remember those 3 things, the 3 things for popularity. I rocked up in year 7 as this nervous, pasty white Ranger kid who played in the under 14 E's. Never was there or will there be a division in soccer lower than what I played in. I mean, it was like comedy on the field every week. It was fun, but it wasn't successful. But here's the thing, and this is what I'm pointing to with those 3 points of popularity. I was bullied in school. That kid you saw was bullied in school. I was bullied mostly because of how I looked and also because of how uncoordinated I was. Now, I was fortunate enough to have a pretty decent sense of humour, so I could laugh along with the jokes for the most part. But after a while, that mockery began to take its toll. And all of a sudden, I began to believe lies about myself that were not true. In particular, that boy you saw up there began to believe 3 things. That I was undesirable, that I was unsuccessful, and worst of all, that I was unlovable. And see, the reason as a 15-year-old that I was able to believe those things was because I had bought into this culture around me. I bought into this culture that told me that the value of my worth as a human being was based on appearance, popularity, and success. And because I thought about myself that I was lacking in those things, I would have done anything to have them. And I did. I started to say things and behave in ways that I didn't feel comfortable, but I wanted the approval. I began to do things which at first I didn't feel comfortable doing because I wanted that approval. See, we have these desires in our heart and we will do anything to fulfill them. And that is why it's so important to know what will actually fulfill us. See, I was so easily manipulated in high school. Up until about year 9, up until that 15, I was 15. And I was easily manipulated until I had this encounter with Jesus. I was invited along to this Catholic camp. It was similar to Ignite, but boiled right down to only about 60 or 70 people. And I was sitting in adoration, like we're about to have in just a couple of minutes' time. And I was angry with God. See, I'd been raised in this beautiful Catholic family that had taught me seemingly everything there was to know about Jesus, about the Bible, about religion. But nevertheless, despite all of the things I knew about Jesus, I sat there in adoration and I was angry. And I remember I had my eyes closed, I was kneeling down and I was praying. And I remember saying to Jesus, Jesus, if you love me, like everyone keeps telling me you do, why do I feel so worthless and empty? Jesus, if you love me, like everyone keeps telling me you do, prove it. Show me. And it was in that moment that I honestly opened my heart to Jesus, that I had my Damascus Road experience. It was like the floodgates of heaven opened and his grace, his mercy, his love poured down upon me like a rain. I remember feeling this warmth radiating from the Blessed Sacrament and filling me up. All of a sudden, I realized while I was away on that camp and in that moment that I was in the presence of the God of the universe. And not only was I in the presence of God, but I realized in that moment that he loved me, that he cared for me, just as he loves every single one of you here present. with a love beyond your imagination, beyond all telling. When I experienced that love, all of the sadness, all of that anger, all of those issues of self-worth, they began to evaporate because they felt like nothing compared to the love of Jesus. And from that day, I knew one thing had changed, just like St. Paul, that Jesus was and forever would be the center of my life. Because after I'd experienced that love, I realized that my value, my worth, it wasn't dependent on the opinion of others or the culture around me. I had something so much greater than that. I often think back on that experience and I wondered to myself, if I had taken the bait, what if I had gone down the path of my culture at that school? What if I had taken the bait and just spent my life chasing after money, appearance, popularity, success above Jesus? I would have never opened my heart enough to experience this life-changing love. I would have never opened my heart enough to hear God's will for my life, to become a priest. To become a priest, to love you, serve you, not only to receive Jesus' love for myself, but to share that love with all of you here today and for the rest of my life. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from all of this, it's this. No matter where you've been, no matter what you've experienced, no matter what sin you're struggling with, anything you've done, anything that's been done to you, know this as a fact above everything else. Jesus loves you intimately, and he desires your heart. He desires to fill you up and show you the answers to those deep longings of purpose, of happiness and love, for which all of us long with such desperation. In these coming days, there's going to be all these opportunities to meet Jesus. In our personal prayer, with the worship team, in the music, with prayer teams, in the mass tomorrow, in the reconciliation rally. Please go to confession. I love confession. It's so healing. But also in adoration like we're about to have in just a few moments. Please, I beg you, open your heart to Jesus. Let him in. Because when you experience the life-changing love of God, it will change your life forever. Thank you.